Hello and welcome then to this week's episode. We are on episode 11 as we're going to start looking at low-level disruption in the classroom and how we can tackle that and support teachers with dealing with it to make sure we can teach our lessons. Okay, let's do this. Hello, in this week's episode, we're at episode 11. We're looking at low-level disruption and how to tackle low-level disruption in the classroom. Now, there's lots of different types of low-level disruption, so we're not going to go through all of them. We will mention a few. We might come back to some future episodes, but in this episode, we're going to particularly just talk about when children are particularly chatty in a lesson and it's really hard to move on and you're constantly saying, can you stop talking please, can you stop talking please. I think that's probably, we have all the other types of behaviours that can be really annoying, but in particular that continual chatter. Now, some schools will have policies where there's just no talking in classrooms at all, and that's fine. That's just a different type of schools, particularly if they're kind of modelled on someone like the charter schools and the KIPP schools in America. Some of them will have that kind of way of doing things, and that's okay, that's fine, it works, and that's a very particular type of school and style. Other schools may have the style where it's just kind of, we don't have lots of talking, but we allow talking in the classroom, because again, it's just different schools of thought and different ways of working. I'm not saying either are right or wrong, I'm just saying that predominantly in the schools I've worked in, we tend to have classrooms where we allow dialogue and talking, and pupils to kind of get on with things, and so sometimes that chat will creep in, and I think that's predominantly what most of the schools tend to go through, or people struggle with behaviour wise. If you've got that kind of standard in the school where there's no talking, it tends to be like that's part of the culture, so it's easier to manage, and again, that's one of the reasons why you might have that. So no criticism of that, it's just I'm going to talk about what happens when you're in a school where that talking is a little bit more kind of liberal in terms of people are allowed to do it. Other things that you can have in terms of disruption can be talking out of turn, daydreaming, fidgeting, people playing with things. We can have that type of disruption. Distracting others, non-compliance, disrespectful behaviour, late to lessons, that can be kind of disruption. Misuse of technology, so phones out. Again, we'll come back to these in other videos because there's so many here as I'm just listing off the kind of list that I've got here. Leaving a seat without permission and not being prepared to use not having equipment. Those things can bring around disruption. What we're going to talk about though is that kind of chatter, that kind of, you ask them to get on with things and they just keep talking and it keeps coming in and it keeps creeping in. So starting point, as always, we talked about this last time, is to make sure you are referring back to your behaviour policy. So I'm not going to go on too much about that because we have talked about it before. So check your behaviour policy. You must always follow your behaviour policy. Whatever happens, stick to it. Once you've done that, it's all about routines and expectations within the classroom. So have things set up so that you are always ready to go. Particularly when you're looking at your transitions from one activity to another, it's really just about making sure that you are preparing for the next phase, not just simply finishing what you're saying and go, right now we're going to do this, and then you start moving around. And I always think one of the most important things, if you're going to ask for silence, use that silence. Don't ever say to students, I just want you to be quiet now please, and then don't do anything with it, because they'll go, well, why are we quiet then? Now, don't get me wrong, there is time for silence in a classroom. If they're working, you want them silent. It's all about that cognitive load. If there's people talking, they're not focused fully, there's other information going around, conversations are disruptive. There's time also for, think, pair, share activities. So you've got to be really focused about what do you want and why do you want it. Don't just ask them to be quiet because you just want them to sit there quiet and they're not bothering you, because ultimately sometimes working together can be really powerful. If you've got a student who's much more capable than another student, they can help each other. It's proven that, when a student teaches another student, it really kind of embeds that knowledge and understanding of a topic, and it helps because they can describe it in their own language and support the other student. So don't just dismiss chat for no reason unless you have a reason to say we shouldn't be talking now because we're working and we're focused on what we're doing. And again, it's about how you structure your lessons. So for example, one of the things that I would do within maths, because I'm a maths teacher, is I'll start my lessons with obviously my kind of do now task, starter activity, whatever you want to call it. And it's about how I get them in. So again, to manage that low level disruption is about having that activity ready when they come into the classroom. So handing out your starter activity, having it up on the board. If you're using dry whiteboards, do they already have those boards in their bag so they can just get them out and start the activity? Do you have them out on the desk? Do you have someone hand them out the door? How you prepare for that first activity is going to impact on the rest of the lesson and whether they're ready to make sure they're not talking. If you're not prepared, students will eat you alive. Okay, you have got to be ready and you've got to be prepared for those activities. So a lot of the time, if you're getting that low level disruption, and I know from my own experience, even after years of teaching, more often than not, if they are talking, it's because I am not prepared. It's because I haven't quite got things right, or I've made a mistake and misplanned something. So reflection is really, really important. But if you get those things right, it can still happen. They can still talk. It's not always just your fault. Okay, we've always got to look at behaviour from both sides. So you look at it and say, right, got my activities ready. They're going to hand them out. If you've got a particularly disruptive child, could you get them to do something? Giving students who are challenging and naughty sometimes activities to do is a very powerful way to get them on board, because again, it comes back to, I've said before, they're either after something or trying to avoid something, and if it's attention they're after, positive attention is just as good. So give them a focus, give them something to do. I used to have a student years ago who I used to give the starter activity to. We'd do like some timetable stuff when I worked in the middle school. I'd get him to hand them out. I'd sit at his desk, actually. It was part of the fun of that kind of playing, along with the behaviour and supporting him. So I'd sit at the desk, he'd hand out the starter to me that I'd already given him. He knew the same thing we did, had the same structure. So routine is really important. So students know exactly what's going to happen, how it's going to work every lesson. He'd go around and hand out the starter activity. I'd sit there with his pen ready. I'd write his name on the starter activity. And then once he'd hand them out, we'd switch. They'd do the activity, we'd switch back, and then he would read out the answers and I'd mark it. And again, it's just a way of getting students involved. And you can move that around as well. And you can say to someone that, like if you do that today, that's really good. You can do it again next week if you are, well behaved and, support other students in the classroom. And you can rotate it around a number of students and use that strategy to help them, keeps them engaged, give them something to do. They must be active at all times. The army used to have a phrase, I'm sure they still do, of the concurrent activity at all levels. So it's making sure people are working at all levels, no matter what their kind of position or rank is. So within the classroom, it's about whatever their behaviour type is, whether a really good student or disruptive student, making sure they're always working and on something, have something to do. So being prepared is incredibly important. When it comes to then within the actual main lesson, again, it's about your transition points. It's about how you introduce topics. So in the style that I would use within maths is we'll normally do like the kind of our knowledge section at the beginning. So we'll introduce something, we'll explain it, we'll give like the kind of instruction. Then we'll do kind of like an I go. So I'll explain how I do an activity and how we go through the question with a demonstration. Sometimes with no talking at all, just kind of drawing or writing the things on the board or going through the PowerPoint, letting them just follow. Opportunity to ask questions, and again, it depends on what your school prefers and their style. Some people say you shouldn't do that. I'm going to go back to what I've said before. Do what works. Don't get kind of bogged down with the fads and what people put on Twitter, because people will slam some things and say some things are the best thing. Do what works for you and what gets you results. Try, test them out, be brave, be bold, do these things. Don't just listen to other people's criticisms. By all means, take on board what people say, because there's great knowledge out there and experience, and read up on the books and the material that's out there, but don't get too bogged down with people saying, oh, you shouldn't do this because it's wrong. Because I'll go back to the example of VAC that we used to use years ago. If you didn't use VAC, you were criticised because you were like, oh, you're not a proper teacher, you don't use VAC, you should be catering for all of their needs, whether visual, audio, kinesthetic. And then all of a sudden it was like, actually, if you use it, you're a bit of a loser, you shouldn't be using it, it's the wrong thing, it's totally the wrong idea. So just be careful of what comes in and out. I'm very cautious of that. I do like to see what's going in and out and using what things work, but just be cautious of people promoting something without any kind of real backbone to it. What I'm talking about when I do these videos is my own experience of what works over 20 years. So that's my own kind of experience of it, and I know because I've seen it work and I've used it in my own lessons. I still use it on a daily basis. Some of the things I'm talking about in this video I've used in the last week. So it's live, it's fresh. It's not, I'm not someone who's been away from the classroom for 5-10 years talking about something that they haven't got the experience recently about, with the problems and dilemmas that we have in modern schools with, the effects of COVID. So that disruption in the classroom, it can happen. Students will start talking, they'll be disruptive. And then it's about how you bring them back. So you can use different things. You'll have seen, if you've read up on any of the kind of modern thinking, whether it's STAR or SLANT, and different ways of getting the students to track you and listen to you. You might have a hand up for silence, you might do a countdown, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. I like to mix up some of those strategies. So I do talk about consistency all the time, but sometimes it's good to throw something different to get their attention. So sometimes I'll even just write something on the board. I've come in before and done a starter where I've just come in and written something on the board and said nothing, and the students are like, oh, what's going on, this is different. And so when I say be consistent and do the same things all the time, it doesn't mean you can't do them, but just understand why you're doing them. Have a purpose. It always comes from that, begin with why. So Doesn't matter what you're doing, just make sure you try to be consistent or have a reason for doing something. So again, they're all chatty. I want them doing an activity. How do I get their attention? We do a signal. Okay, so our signal should be something that is consistent. So hand up for silence, get their attention, and then bring them back. But again, having purpose. Don't pause, get them to pause and stop and put their pens down, empty hands or whatever. Again, rule you have to get their attention. So they're focus tracking you around the room. Get their attention and then use that time. If you don't, and you then suddenly go, well, I've got you all quiet, now I'm going to turn around and mess around with the box with some paper in, all they're going to do is go, well, that was pointless, and now I'm really annoyed because it made me stop and it was for no reason. And then when you try to get their attention next time, you're going to find it harder because actual fact that all you've taught them, and again, we're teaching them behavior, all you've taught them is that every time you stop, it's for no reason, so why would they stop? So when you stop and when you pause the lesson for any reason, you make that reason clear and you use it. That's what's really important. So we get their attention, we give them something to do, and then be really clear about how they're going to start. Now, if we're struggling to get their attention, then you've got to build in your rewards. You've got to have that conversation around, okay, this is what I want you to do. When you all go silent, I'm looking for the first few. We use a hands up system, so hands up, and then we get the silence. And what I'll do is I'll use the percentage method. So I'll go, I've got 10%, 20%, 30%, 40%. I'm looking for 100%. Come on, who's going to be there? And then I'll use a kind of competition, but in a controlled way. What we don't want students getting excited. And then if I see someone's not going to hand up, go, oh, we're so close, we're almost there. So that dialogue's really important. Keeping it positive. One of the things where teachers go wrong is that they'll turn around and go, you've not got your hand up, and have a go at a student. Now, don't get me wrong. There's a time and a place for telling someone off if you have to. There's a time and place for picking up on something. But you want to be like 99% of the time positive and say, brilliant, we're nearly there. Come on, I'm just waiting for the last person. And the students will help you because they want to move on and they want to be ready. And so, again, making sure they're not picking and bullying other students. Well, you've got to be careful of all those sort of things. So many things to juggle around when you're dealing with these things. And that's why it's not straightforward. It takes time and practice. And that's why you want to really get other people to come and observe your lessons and give you that feedback on what you're trying to achieve with dealing with low-level disruption. And get people to be kind of critical of it and saying what worked and what didn't work, because it's good to have that external kind of opinion. So you get their attention, you put the hand up, move on with the activity very quickly, and then you get them going and they're working, and they might be getting a bit chatty at some point, so you need to bring them back. So you can again do the hands up for silence, talk to them. Now if you continue to see this as a problem, this is where most people find the difficulty with low-level disruption, is they try the remind, it doesn't happen. So you have your warning system. Again, whether it's you've got a C1, C2 type system, we use a warning, sanction, removal. So they get 3 opportunities. I don't believe in having loads and loads of opportunities. There are some things that are non-negotiable. Someone picks up and throws something across the room, or punches someone or something really, really dramatic. We don't go, don't do that again. We go straight to sanction or removal. But for continually talking, it's a warning. You have that conversation, and the next time it's a sanction, because they don't need to be told a number of times. It's really clear, and once you build those expectations, as long as you're consistent, they'll get used to it. Now, one of the things I like to do is coming back to one of the early sessions we did on seating plans. I mark that off, and I do like mini attitude to learning checks throughout the lesson. So I say in 5-10 minutes time, come around to look at what work you've done, and I will be awarding points for those people who've got on with the task, those people who are working silently, and you make a big deal of those people who are working. And to some extent, you can tactically ignore the people who are causing low-level disruption to give the praise to the ones who are doing things right. That's one strategy. You could tackle the student who's talking continue by going down next to them, being really kind of low-level, quiet, just say, look, I've noticed you keep talking. You're not getting on with the work as much. I'm going to give you like a warning now. You put a little cross on your seating plan and you say, I'm going to come back to you in 10 minutes. I expect you to be working. Please don't talk. Because if you talk again, you're going to have, it's going to make me have to give you a sanction. I don't want to. And that language is really important to say, I don't want to do that. So it's clear that they're making that decision. They're making the decision to get the attention. It's not you, it's them. Put the ownership back on them with that conversation. 9 times out of 10, that will work. Don't get me wrong, there's always going to be a student who's going to go against all of the things I've talked about, but most of the time it will work. So you have that conversation, dialogue with them, and then you repeat it, and you go through your sanction process. But essentially, when you've got that continual low-level disruption, it's about challenging it, not ignoring it, tactically thinking about how you're going to deal with it, whether you're going to kind of say it as a whole class or individual. Ideally, stuff low-level one-to-one is better. But if it's whole class talking, you might need to say it to a number of students at once. Say, right, well, this is the expectation. I expect you to get on and work. I'm going to come around and do an attitude to learn check in 5-10 minutes. I'm going to mark off those people working. Those people are doing really, really well. We'll get points, positives, whatever your system is. those people, if you're not doing it, then we'll have a follow-up conversation afterwards. And if one of the things I talk about all the time is the most powerful weapon is a phone call home. So that conversation with the student saying, look, if you're not getting on, I'm going to have to call home because you're not meeting the expectations. But refer all behaviour back to learning, behaviour for learning, not just telling them off. You are literally working because you're trying to get the best outcomes in terms of your education. And if you do that, if you have that conversation with parents, again, they can't really fall out of you, because more often than not, when you're talking to a parent about behaviour, they see it as a criticism of themselves. And that may well be true, but if you have that dialogue with them where you're making it out that you're blaming them, you'll lose them. What you've got to do is say, I need your help, I need your support. Comes back to the scripted conversations, previous video. I need your help and support in getting your child to where they need to be, so they're learning, doing the best that they can in the lesson. And that, that conversation is far more powerful. Also, when you have that conversation with a parent, show them the book, have a meeting, get them in, say, can you come and have a look at the book? I need your child to work with us. They need to be, don't focus on the kind of the bad attitude and the behavior, focus on the learning. They're not learning. And if you bring it back to that, it's really powerful. And the same thing then when you're dealing with that low level disruption, get, a student's got a really good book, and get the permission, do all those things, and don't show the parent that the book and the names, GDPR, all that sort of stuff. But you can certainly say, can I borrow your book? Would you mind if I show an example of some of the work, make sure it's got no names on it, and then do a comparison, say, listen, this is the standard, this is what we expect, this is good attitude to learning, or whatever phrase you want to use, and then use that to then help them say, look, your son or daughter is more than capable of doing this, but at the moment they're not achieving this because they're too busy talking. Change your seating plan as well. Comes back to what we said a few videos ago when we talked about seating plans. Change is good as a new thing. If there's low level disruption, move them around. More often than not, each term I do a little bit of a shuffle in my room, because I know some people get comfortable. Need to put them out of the comfort zone a little bit, because then they're focused on the learning. They're too busy about thinking, oh, don't worry about who's, I'm not sure about if I want to work with this person, that person. I'll just focus on my work. Not going to be disruptive. So that, in a nutshell, we've come to the end of the time, is pretty much what you can do to tackle some of the low level disruption. It's really about kind of simple strategies of just establish clear, consistent rules, use positive reinforcement, address disruptive behavior immediately, do not let it go, be proactive in preventing disruptions, use a variety of different strategies, and build positive relationships. Can use humour sometimes, but be careful of sarcasm. You've got to know your students. My advice is don't go anywhere near it if you're unsure. You've got to know your students. But also, comes back to what I said before, if you say something, you think, I'll use a bit of humour, and you get it wrong, it's on you. Own up to it, and kind of acknowledge that it's your fault you got it wrong, because you'll build better relationships that way. Use empathy. Involve parents at all times, and provide students with opportunities to reflect on their behaviour and their learning by showing them their work, saying, is this really your best? I think you're capable of more. Use that language with them. Think about how you do that. And then if you're still struggling, seek support from colleagues, SLT, heads of year, any pastoral team, if they know the students, find out the background, get a little bit of information on them, and that will see you through. Low level disruption is the biggest enemy of learning, and it sneaks in. It's really kind of stealthy. It kind of happens quickly without you realizing, so you have to stay on it. You've got to be really on it. Don't be tempted to be one of those teachers who sets them off on the task and think, oh, I'll be all right, I can sit back now. It's like, you have to be in the moment, you have to be there, have to be focused, make the most out of every lesson, and be super on it. If you've got the pace right in your lesson, they shouldn't be working for too long anyway, because you should be doing something and then quickly going on, checking it, getting that feedback, using dry whiteboards. And again, depending on subjects, it's not possible on all subjects, but you do those quick checks and then you move on to the next section. Again, not always teacher led necessarily. If it's independent work, you've got to mix and match. It depends on your style, depends on the subject, depends on your school policy as well with teaching and learning. Lots of things to take on board there, but hopefully that's some good guidance. I will leave you with that and look forward to seeing you in the next one. Take care.